Paul says it this way when he talks about what happens when human beings, decide to trust in God. God, this is a promise, he says. This is what God does. All things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Doesn't mean God causes everything to happen so good can come out of it. It says that when bad things happen, God has a way of wringing good from evil, bending evil to accomplish his purposes. No suffering is wasted with God. That's one of the things we believe. And if you look back over your life, so often, if you have trusted God with the pain and suffering in your life, you look back and you see all the ways that God redeemed it, brought something good and beautiful from it. This week 2 weeks ago, I received an email from a woman in our congregation who lost a baby at 24 weeks. Then she had a little boy, and her son ended up autistic, and then with cancer. And then she had cancer while he had cancer. And at one point, she was angry and disappointed, and disappointed with people who were telling her, everything happens for a reason, and it must be the will of God. But then in the middle of that, she began to turn back to God. She began to trust in God. And as she trusted in God, she began to find God sustaining her and caring for her, and God working through doctors and nurses and medication and answering prayers in those ways through these people and the people who came alongside her. And then out of that, she said, I think I'm supposed to do something to help with childhood cancer research because very few dollars are spent working on childhood cancer. And so she felt out of the pain called to do something about it. She's raised $4 million, nearly single-handedly $4 million to aid in cancer research. And when I look at her, she's a picture of Romans 8:28 and what God does in making all things, forcing all things to accomplish good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So people respond to tragedy in one of two ways. Some people say, I see the tragedy in the world and I just can't believe that there is a God who makes these things happen, causes them to happen, or allows them to happen. There just can't be. I just can't believe in God. But other people, like the woman I just described, Elise Hofen, other people find in the midst of the tragedy or in the aftermath of it, after a little anger, they turn back to God. They find that they can't do life without God because of the suffering in the world. They need God. They have to have God walking with them. And that's part of what I'm hoping that you see and you decide to do. I once asked an atheist this question. I said, now, you believe and I believe that suffering happens in the world. It's self-evident. I said, how do you explain natural disasters? And he gave the same explanation I just gave you a moment ago. So how do you explain illness? He gave the same explanation I gave you a moment ago. How do you explain human suffering? And he gave the same explanation I did. Human beings have a tendency to do the wrong thing. And I said, well, we're given the same answer, both of us, except for there's one key difference. You look at all that stuff and you say, I can't believe there's God. And I look at all that stuff and say, there has to be a God who can sustain us and help us. And I said, you look at all that and you take God out of the equation, you still have the same amount of suffering. You just don't have hope. You don't have somebody who's going to climb in the pen with you. You don't have a Holy Spirit working inside of you to sustain you. You don't have people who are nudged by the Spirit to come alongside you. You don't have a church family who's going to carry you. All you got is your suffering and no hope. And so, we make a decision. We choose faith or we reject it. I understand why people reject it. But I'm going to tell you, there's something to choosing faith and knowing that God doesn't cause all of these things, but God walks with us through them. I want to end with this. This week I spoke to one of our members, a remarkable man named Eddie Connor. In 1996, he and his wife Mary lost their youngest child, Allie. After that, to cancer. And after that, they found out that they each had a recessive gene, and this was a genetic form of cancer that turned into leukemia. And they already had 2 children, and they were okay. They didn't have this same trait. And they asked the doctor, well, what's the chance if we had one more baby that we would lose this child to cancer, this form of cancer? They said 1 in 250,000. So not a very high chance that this will happen again. They had one more child. Her name was Stella. Stella was born in 2001, and it was not long after that they discovered that Stella also had the same cancer. Both children had every medical treatment they could possibly provide to save the lives of these kids, a bone marrow transplant and a host of other things. Stella died 18 years ago this week. She was not quite 3 years old. And then it wasn't but a few years after that, actually, while she was alive, her mother was also diagnosed with cancer. And 3 years after that, her mother, Mary, died of cancer. This is a picture of the family. And so you see Allie is the little one there who died in 1996, and Stella died a few years later, and then Mary. And so I wanted to talk to him. I talked to him several times, and I just wanted to say, Eddie, he's a part of our congregation. I said, Eddie, how did you survive this? How did you survive the loss of 2 children and your wife to cancer? How did your faith survive this? I couldn't imagine a more horrible situation. And he said, we'd started coming to Church of the Resurrection. We started questioning some of the assumptions we had about faith, even while Mary was still alive, even while Stella was still alive. We started questioning, is God really causing this? Is this what God does? Does God make people sick? And then how does God answer prayer? And what does that look like? And we didn't think God gave us this cancer. And he said, I remember the day I was at Waterways car wash on 119th Street near Mission Road. And while I was at Waterways, I was standing there. I was about to have a breakdown. My one daughter had died. I have a second daughter who's sick, and my wife is sick. And he said, all of a sudden, I called out to God, and all of a sudden, I felt a peace that just came over me. As if God was saying, I've got you. I've got you, Eddie. And I've got your wife, and I've got your daughter, and I've got your other daughter, and I've got your kids. I've got a hold of you, and I'm not going to let you go. He didn't take that as a promise that his wife was going to be miraculously healed or his daughter would be miraculously healed. He just knew that whatever he was going to walk through, God was going to walk with him through it. Eventually lost both of his two younger children and his wife. And he kept clinging to his faith. And he said, I turned to God, and God continued to sustain me. And he said, in the end, here's what I know. Our faith is a necessity. It is the only hope we have. I'm quoting him. Your faith allows you to transcend anything. In every thick and thin situation, goodness transcends the tragedy. He eventually met a new woman who shared her life with him. She'd come out of a divorce. He shared his life with her. They both had two children. This is a picture of their family together. And he told me as we were talking this week, he said, God sustained me through the pain. And he brought from it something good and beautiful I would have never expected. And today, I have a chance to tell other people that when you have a choice of turning away from God or turning to God in the midst of suffering, it's not God who's brought the suffering, and he doesn't miraculously take it all away, but he walks with us in a way that sustains us and carries us and leads us home. Here's my invitation to you. I can't prove to you the existence of God. I can lay out a pretty good case for it, I think, and I can tell you my experience of God and the difference he makes in my life and the logical reasons why I have faith. And in the end, at some point, you have to take a step of faith. You have to say, I choose to believe. I hope I have at least given some answers to the problem of suffering. And in the end, we have to decide, do we turn away from God and leave that hope behind, or do we turn to God who walks in the pen with us and carries us and sustains us? And this is my invitation for you today. I want to invite you to take that step of faith. I want to invite you to say, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief.